Basically, what this demo is going to show is using ChatGPT with the GPT-4 model with the Wolfram Alpha plugin enabled. In this case, we'll show building a stacked column chart where we're going to assign some business logic that we want ChatGPT to always take into consideration when generating the chart. So let's dive right in. So I've got a few tips here. Experiment, experiment, experiment. You'll want to simplify as you engineer your prompts. I've also got a stopwatch here. So as we go through this, I've got some prompts prepared so we won't have to sit there and type them out. We'll see what works, what doesn't work, and I will edit the video down so the stopwatch should jump when you're actually watching it as we progress through the demo here, so that you don't have to sit through GPT-4 waiting to respond. All right, so we'll go ahead and start the stopwatch and get the clock running. And let's look at what we're using. So I'm here in ChatGPT. I've just got my screen split here so you don't see the left-hand side. It's kind of got the mobile view here. We're using the GPT-4 model, and we're going to go ahead and I've been messing around with both the shop plugin, which I think would be incredibly powerful for e-commerce, but the Wolfram plugin is the one that we're going to look at here because it can do all kinds of math and all kinds of other stuff. I think earlier I said Wolfram Alpha. Not quite sure how they're running the branding, but that's how I remember it from when they first launched. And then in my other window in Obsidian, I have my prompts already written. So first prompt we're going to do is basically let ChatGPT know we want help making a stacked column chart and that we're going to describe the chart and the business logic to apply to the data that I will then give. So this chart is going to be used to report on Agile Delivery Team's total sprint capacity, taking into account planned PTO, accepted points per sprint, and completed points for each sprint, all for the period of Q2 2023. Each sprint is 2 weeks long and always begins on a Monday. The categories for this chart, basically along the x-axis, are the dates of every other Monday for each sprint beginning for the months of April, May, and June of 2023. So we're reinforcing that it's Q2 there. The first sprint start date is the 3rd of April, the second, the 17th of April, etc. There's 4 main subcategories for each week. Some of the subcategories have specific business logic that must be applied to the initial value given before the charted value can be determined. The main subcategories with their business logic are total sprint capacity. The value of this is whatever number is needed to make the entire stacked column for a given sprint always reach and never exceed 50 in total. Rather than providing this in the data, calculate this value after all other data points have been taken into consideration. This should be shown in the color light blue. Planned PTO appears at the top of the stack. Reduce the value for total sprint capacity by that amount so that the stack still reaches 50 total. This should be shown in the color light gray. So basically we've got a sprint team's total capacity. In this example, let's just say sprint's 2 weeks. There's 5 people on the team. For whatever reason, it's 1 point per day. So 10 days, 5 people, 1 point per day. That's 50 total. You'll always need to reduce the total sprint capacity by any planned PTO for any known weeks ahead. And then as we get into sprint planning, right, accepted points. So these are how many story points is the team accepting. So the chart value is the initial accepted points value given with any completed points subtracted from it. For example, if completed points is 20 and accepted points is 40, the chart value for accepted points is 40. And actually, that is incorrect. If completed points is 20 and accepted points is 40, the chart value for accepted points is 20. Because basically, we want this to always show a representation like a thermometer or a goal progress rather than the actual discrete original measured value, right? Because in the historic view, we want to show really the completed points overlaid on the accepted points. Now, if accepted points is less than completed points for a given week, use 0 as the value for accepted points. This keeps us from generating some negative values unintentionally. The color should be shown, this should be shown in the color light green. And then completed points has the same chart value as initial value given. This should be shown in the color green. And so here, we've got some business logic applied. And so we're going to tell it this is how we want the chart to function. And as we generate this, and so basically, you'll see I picked up my markdown formatting here from Obsidian, but it should be fine with that. And so now it's going to tell us it understands the instructions. It has not yet called the Wolfram plugin. And it wants the data for each sprint's planned PTO, accepted points, and completed points. Please provide those values for each sprint beginning on the dates you mentioned. So it's kind of prompting us on how we want our data. We don't have to provide it exactly in that format. And just in case we mess up, I'm going to do a quick bonus tip here. And this prompt here should tell us to checkpoint our progress right here. Oh, look at that. An error occurred. Let's try this again. So I'm asking it to please checkpoint as part of our conversation as phase one. If I ask you to start back at phase one, I want you to think back to the previous prompt and response where I was setting up that chart and take further instructions from that as a starting point. Okay? All right, so they're confirming, yes, we will do that. All right, let's just take a quick look at how our clock is going, about 5 minutes in. So now let's go back to populating the initial data. So set the initial chart values as follows. And once I put this in, I'm going to go ahead after I copy this. So we'll populate some initial data and then we'll catch up the completed points. And there are some possible corrections based on when I tested this before. So let's go ahead and pull the clock back up. We will enter these information. So basically, we know we're going to say it's today, right? We're planning the sprint that began on May 15th. And we know that the sprint beginning May 22nd, there are 5 points of planned PTO, so 5 days total. And that's, of course, the sprint that includes the US Memorial Day holiday. And then 5 for the sprint that has June 30th in it, because whatever sprint has June 30th in it, I don't know the sprint beginning, but offhand, I don't have it in front of me. But GPT will figure that out. Oh, and look, I spelled sprint wrong. It should be fine with that. And then the accepted points. We want 40 accepted points for the first 2 sprints and 45 for the sprints up to and including the sprint beginning the 15th of May. And then render the chart for the information we have so far. All right. So it's used Wolfram. We'll see the output that we get here. So it's kind of rendering it here in Markdown with a URL to that chart graphic. Cool. All right, let's see what we got here. So it's basically giving us quite the narrative here of what it does. Now we could ask it to be less chatty, which would help us save on our response tokens. If we look here, all right, I've got this chart, completed points. We don't have any completed points on there. Accepted points. Oh, that's my light green. And here's for the first 2 weeks. I guess that's the accepted points there from 10 to 50. And then let's see what was the initial instructions here. And yep, 40 for the first 2 sprints and 45 for the sprints up to including the sprint beginning the 15th of May. And this is what it tends to do, is it tends to want to actually go past the 15th of May. So we will try to fix that in a moment. Then we've got the planned PTO and the total sprint capacity. Now the thing is it's kind of drawn this chart upside down from how I want it. So let's go back to our instructions and look at the possible corrections. And all right, it did not add everything up, which had fixed the prompt so it wouldn't do that, but it does have the order not how I want it to be. So let's go ahead and let it know that the order of the data points per sprint from the bottom of the column to the top should always be completed points, accepted points, total sprint capacity, and planned PTO. And so while it's thinking about that, let's look at what it actually sent Wolfram. Here is the input and the response. So in this case, it gave Wolfram, it took and basically the information that we gave it, it interpreted and told Wolfram the instructions that it needed to render the chart that it provided back to us. So this is where that abstraction of using the large language model and the conversational chat interface to define these business rules resulted in a chart that follows those business rules. Now, it's going to do the updated column chart here, hopefully in the right order. Now that's an interesting one here. This actually has totally bombed out on us and not shown what it should be. Now let's just take a peek and seeing what it did, what it sent to Wolfram for that last one. Yeah, not sure. I think we know that ChatGPT sometimes hallucinates, and I think sometimes when it takes the plain language and sends the request to Wolfram, it will hallucinate during that phase, and then it just does not have a chance of success. So maybe it can say something that is correctly a valid input that gets us a response from Wolfram, but it is not the chart. Remember we had set that checkpoint? Start back at phase 1. So let's see if we can get it to roll back. All right, so now it's reminding me what I want to do. And while it's rendering, I'm going to go back to my prepared text here. And we may start with this additional correction before we have it send data. And it brings my markdown formatting back. That's quaint. Okay, now it's reiterated back where we were at phase 1, and it wants to provide the data here. Let's go ahead and tell it ahead of time that the order of the data points. So before it starts calling Wolfram, let's give it more prompting on the abstraction. This in my initial earlier test, having these orders, having this order after the initial rendering in the order that I did not want, it worked fine. But of course, because I'm doing a demo video, it wants to give trouble now. Now, every time I've done this, it basically takes us too far. So let's say 40 for the first 2 sprints, 45 for the next 2 sprints. How about let's just say the 3rd and 4th sprints. And let's see if it implicitly knows that we actually don't want any more data with it. So let's bring the clock back. And now it's going to ask Wolfram. And we can see while the clock is going and while this is green, we can actually watch it sit there and think about the request it is going to send to Wolfram as GPT-4 slowly generates the request. All right, this actually looks pretty good here. Stacked column chart. I can see that this is maxing out at 50 across the board. The first 2 sprints have accepted points of 40. The next 2 sprints have accepted points of 45. And we see the total sprint capacity is drawn down by the plan PTO. We're following the business logic that the stack should never exceed 50. We're also following the business logic that plan PTO appears at the top, the order in which we want these shown in, yada, yada, yada. So if you remember that tip that I had at the beginning about experiment, plan to work through your prompts a few times. I find kind of keeping it in these sections in here is helpful. Since we like this, let's go ahead and call this phase 2 and make sure ChatGPT is good with that. I'm sure it will be. And we have some completed points to date. So once it's good with me checkpointing it here to phase 2, it's really insistent that it wants me to provide that additional data or instructions for the chart. So let's go ahead and see the completed points. Now remember, it should figure out the values that we want based on these completed points. So again, it should add these to the first 3 without making the chart exceed 50, without showing that the sprint capacity for any of these first 3 is different, but kind of eating away or decrementing the accepted points with the completed points that we have specified. And essentially what ChatGPT needs to do is each time it needs to send the full request for generating the chart to Wolfram. I suspect that in some of my errors, it is not sending the full request, but it is sending a partial request. I have not yet tried a prompt that says, hey, just send the entire request needed to generate the points. You can actually see here in the math, it's building this formula. And it gave us this response here. And there's a problem, and it's going to try it again. See, it gave us an error. Is not a valid data set or list of data sets. So again, I think by progressively asking ChatGPT to change the data, it introduces potential hallucinations or errors. I don't know that all errors are really hallucinations that trip it up. All right, so it sent the request and received it, and it's going to keep attempting to regenerate the chart. I wonder if it's sending anything different or if it's sending the same thing. Is it meeting the definition of insanity here? All right, assuming I've cut out this whole section, basically it kept trying and trying and trying because it wasn't sending the complete payload to Wolfram. It's continually only sending a portion of the payload here. And Wolfram was coming back always with an error that it's not a valid data set or list of data sets. And so, since we kind of know the error, and I can interpret the error, I've asked it to stop, and I'm going to say, ask it to start back at phase 2. I'm asking it just to let me know it's okay, rather than giving me the whole verbose response. Let's modify here. Set the completed points to be as follows. Correctly. So basically, I'm going off my interpretation of the errors we saw in Wolfram there, that it's not sending the whole thing there, but just part of it. Let's see if it sorts itself out there. Taking a peek here, we see the data objects. Looks like it might be doing a better job here. All right. It believes it has valid output for me. Boom. All right. So let's see what we have here. Max is out at 50. The first two have a capacity of 40. If you recall, the values we sent were 37, 40, 42 on that capacity there of the original. What was the original capacity we had there? 45. Yep, 45 on the original capacity, decremented by the planned PTO. All right, so we can assume that we are now, like, our chart is caught up for this month. Let's see what else might we be able to do this, right? So I did not have the issue where it showed accepted points too far into the future, or maybe we fixed that earlier. We don't have any horizontal label here. So we could try a couple of things, but let's first show off just the ability to add a data point. Let's see here. The value of, let's say that we are past this week of the sprint of May 15th, and it was not a great sprint, right? So for whatever reason, there's some unplanned PTO. All right, so update the chart to show all the data given so far, as well as the value of 20 for completed points for May 15th. We know that's the sprint beginning May 15th, but it's the data point there. And accepted points of 44 for May 29th, that next one. So basically we're kind of retro sprint planning. The team really missed their 20 versus that, and the 44 for the 9th. So let's see if we can get that additionally to render. While we're thinking about that, let's go ahead and write up a prompt to see if we can add two different labels to it. And I had tried this on a previous test when it had shown me a sprint beginning label. Have that add a horizontal axis label, sprint beginning, to be centered under the chart, and add a subtitle at the top of the chart that reads last updated currently, current date, current time. So here's where it's starting to struggle, right? It likes to try to shortcut the request, and then the response comes out as not a valid data set or list of data sets. Let's go get a bit messy at the end here. We'll see how far we go with this. I can see it doing this input. The map if there on the third line generally shows I'm probably headed in the wrong direction. So we'll go ahead and stop that. I wonder if I can start back at phase 2 and explicitly ask it to add those. So start back at phase 2 and add the value of 20 for completed points for May 15th and accepted points of 44 for May 29th. Now, I know the way I'm saying that is not a very structured way, kind of linguistically, but that's somewhat intentional, right? I'm trying to make my language kind of natural, switch up how I'm calling out these date formats, and talk through that. So it's got that map if there. We'll see if that works. We'll give it this one last try. If not, we will celebrate the chart that we got where it was this far. Again, this is just a demonstration example of using Wolfram with ChatGPT to abstract some business logic. Did not like that. It's going to try to correct it and regenerate it. We'll let it go one more time before I stop it, and then just say start back at phase 2 and show me the chart that you have and see if it can at least return us basically regenerate the chart that it had before. It does not like that, so we'll stop that. All right, so a few attempts to adjust this. It just wasn't quite getting the data points updated correctly. However, again, this is a demonstration. This is an example showing how we're abstracting this business logic around these chart elements and not having to think about those in the work that we do. So let's just see if we can at least get it to wrap up by starting back at phase 2 and showing us the chart at that point in time, which I think was where I had checkpointed it when the chart was rendering fairly acceptably. All right, so we see here it used Wolfram. Looks like it sent a more complete response. And maybe by studying these requests that it's sending to Wolfram, I might be able to evolve my language here. Sprint dates, date object, completed points, accepted points, sprint capacity. But it got us the chart back at phase 2 where we had checkpointed it previously. So that's good. And I may go ahead and end the video here, but I'm going to try one more thing. And if it doesn't work, we'll cut it. All right, so here I'm saying set completed points, since I saw that that is what it is calling that variable there as it sends it, to 37 for 15 May. Let's see if I'm explicit in that regard, if it likes that better. 0, 0, 0, 37 on the 15th of May. This one might actually work. We'll see. Well, it didn't like that attempt. I imagine there is a way to structure this prompt so that it can generate the chart correctly. I'm sure if I had given it these originally, it would be okay, but it seems like this iterative working with the chart, it does sort of struggle with in this abstract way. I'm sure it'll improve, and I've already found some areas of my own work to use this visualization method in, and hope it's something that you've found useful. Drop in the comments if you have any questions, or if you've successfully used this or similar method of the plugins. I'd love to hear about it. You can either, again, put it in the comments or shoot me an email, chris@bussytech.com. Thanks for watching.